So it's still a few days before the game is actually released, but reviews have dropped for the Resident Evil remake. I was one of the people to review it. Check out youtube.com/GameRanksTV. I did the before you buy over there, but I still have a lot more to say about the game. It's all going to be spoiler free though, because like I said in that video, Capcom has a lot of restrictions in place as to what we can cover and what we can even show involving spoilers, which is kind of funny because spoilers for an old game from like 2005, but it's twofold really, because like for me the spoilers was like seeing what's new, what's changed, what's back, stuff like that. So I'm actually going to talk to both people in this video, where this is me just kind of rambling off the cuff, a little less scripted or less bullet pointy and notes than my other videos, but I've been thinking a lot about Resident Evil 4 because I'm a diehard fan. And long story short, I mostly really love this ride. That's what it is. Ask anyone who played the old one, the new one, it's a ride. Now, Resident Evil 4 is a big deal because it's a game that has always kind of had a little bit of an identity crisis, where it is very much rooted to the previous games, but it still wants to be its own thing and go a little bit more buck wild and be a little bit more of an action movie. And I am happy to confirm that the Resident Evil 4 remake retains that identity crisis. And I still, again, I think that's a good thing. But it does it in a different way. So obviously there's been a lot of talk and anticipation about the change of tone. You've seen the trailers. Everything's a little bit more moody, a little bit more darker. You can even get a glimpse of some of that in the demo that they released. Shout out to them releasing a demo. I think game demos should be a thing. They should come back. So you've gotten to see a little bit of the tonal change, right? But I don't think it's changed as much as you think. The further you get into the game, the more it escalates into a big crazy train that the original Resident Evil 4 did. And it doesn't lose sight of that. It keeps some things darker, moodier, scarier, where it should, but it's still a wild adventure and tonally different than the other Resident Evil games. This kind of sets, the stage for the later games, 5, 6, however you feel about them. But in my opinion, it does a couple of things. First and foremost, it does change things. This isn't like a one-to-one remake. Things are remixed. Some things are tweaks. There's a lot still there, most of it. There's a couple little missing things, but ultimately I think most of it is worth it. It also ditches like the early 2000s weight that the old game had, where it was heavily influenced by everything at the time. There was a lot of like Matrix-y bullshit. I love it personally, but this game, since it's more of like a photorealistic thing, they took away some of the Matrix-y elements, if you know what I mean. But thankfully, they keep Leon still cool. He is still an incredible badass. As much as I don't like some of the voice acting choices this time around, it falls a little flat for me, at least for like the first half of the game. Still, it manages to pull away some of the like early 2000s Matrix-y cheese while still having a bunch of cheese. And I think that's a very impressive thing, to be able to walk that line where you're taking some things that were too dorky while still keeping it awesome and like really badass. And this Leon here really kind of matches perfectly with the badass, almost John Wick Leon that we've seen in some of the CGI animated movies, and also the Leon of the Resident Evil 2 remake. And that's what I really liked about this game, is that it is kind of the Resident Evil 2 remakification of 4. But the difference is that the remake of Resident Evil 2 was like, holy shit, this is crazy, because it was a reimagining of a PlayStation 1 game, where Resident Evil 4, I didn't really think it needed to be remade. I still think that game is pretty watertight and very fun to play through, but it applies that similar gameplay formula, that flow, that playability, the character movement, the way items work, the way menus work, the stuff we got from the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake, and applies it here to a game that is fundamentally like just more of like a kick-ass third-person shooter than just a straight horror game. And it doesn't forget that. It doesn't lose sight of that. All the weapons are still satisfying. All of it is still really effective. But most importantly, I think it's not even the gameplay thing where it's like a good bridge between like the Resident Evil 2 remake Leon and then like crazier later on Resident Evil 6 CGI movies Leon. It's really the story and just the little things they do here and there. There's just a bit more acknowledgement of the world and the events in Resident Evil, but also just a little bit more time spent with his character in conjunction with the others. Ashley Graham and Luis have a lot more time here, and it really, really works. I love what they did with Ashley. I love what they did with Luis, not only just as their own characters, having a little bit more and being a little bit more interesting, but also kind of strengthening Leon and strengthening Leon's adventure. Ada as well, as much as she's still kind of like a come and go character, like there's just a little bit more to the interactions they have, the things that they talk about. And as a Resident Evil fan, like I was appreciative of seeing a lot of that play out. This was hard for me though, because like if you watch the Friends Per Second podcast, I was still in the middle of playing the game. Now I'm through it almost twice, which is what you should do with a Resident Evil game, like replay it a lot. At first, like it was hard to kind of wrap my brain around what they were doing, and it felt kind of weird, and especially with like a couple of little things missing, I wasn't sure, but I really like what they added. I really like what they changed. I really like what they kept the same, because by the end, I was like, hell yeah. There is something I just want to point out. I think Gene Park from the Washington Post, a friend of the show, has talked about where if you're a Resident Evil fan, like the experience of playing a remake of these games is something different. Just the way this Capcom team handles them, just the way they feel. There's something so hard to put your finger on about like how it feels playing through these, especially if like you're dedicated to the older ones like we were. And with Resident Evil 4 Remake, it wasn't like an initial thing, like right at the start. I wasn't like, oh, hell yeah, we're back. One thing I talked up a lot in a previous Resident Evil 4 video was how incredible the woods was. Like just what they built in the original game, the tone, the feel of that woods, that intro being absolutely insane up until that first village fight with the chainsaw and everything, and then the bell rings. I don't think they actually totally nailed the intro. Now, that encounter, that whole village fight is still absolutely as butthole clenching as it was back in the day. It is great, but I think the build up to it, the direction of it wasn't quite the same. And I didn't need it to be a one-to-one recreation of that intro. You know, the way he walks into the cabin, the way you hear the car ramming the other car off the road, the way the camera angle jumps to Leon's eyes looking out the window. I love that stuff, but I didn't need this new game to recreate it. I was essentially down with them trying something different, crazier, even more tension building. And I just don't think it totally succeeded there. It didn't build the tension the same way, but it does not detract from the rest of the game at all. The woods here, the color palette, the sound of the wind going through the trees, the level of detail absolutely worked for me. But to circle back to the point I was trying to say before, is that getting into the game, it took me a minute. It wasn't immediate. But as the action escalated, as the boss fights were awesome and more cinematic now, and the music is just incredible, by the end I was like, fuck, like yes. And I know like it sounds like I'm overdoing it, like I'm like hyping, but I just like these games, and I'm happy that they like really retained pretty much the whole feel, the whole experience, the whole excitement. By the end, I was like out of my seat. I wasn't out of my seat because I had been playing the game for like 8 hours straight at that point, which is not always healthy, but you gotta do what you gotta do. It's just a thrill ride, and I'm coming from somebody who's been playing from the beginning, and 4 was like the weird but really good one. But for some people, Resident Evil 4 is actually their first foray into the series. Like a lot of people, I've talked to a lot of people that played the original on GameCube and PS2, and they were like, that was my first Resident Evil game. And I have to like, I'm like, what is that like? But that's how it goes. So I think those people are also going to be very happy here. From the merchant to the boss battles, like the enemy encounters, all of it is kind of ramped up to it having a little bit more to do, a little bit more to keep busy. You know, there's more blue medallions to shoot. There's more things to collect and sell to the merchant. There's just a little bit more explorability in certain specific spots, but nothing that really kind of disrupts things if like you're a total purist. Now, I will say it is more of a remake than the Dead Space remake is, where that was just little twinkles here and there of changes. This is changed up a bit more, but the feel is there, most importantly. I know I said that in the before you buy, I'm kind of repeating myself there, but my biggest takeaway with this really, and it sounds cheesy, but it's the characters. It's those moments. It's the interactions between Leon and Ashley I really liked here. It's the tension of going through some pretty spicy scenarios and not knowing if you're going to make it out on the other end. It's also just the rolling through it and just waiting to see what's next, knowing what's next, but just seeing how exactly it goes down. And knowing kind of as you're getting into it that everything is ramped up and everything is crazy, it just makes it that much sweeter. And again, like if you have never played a Resident Evil game and like you're thinking about this one to jump in, I don't know. I think some people, especially people who back in the day, Resident Evil 4 was their first Resident Evil game, they turned out fine. They would probably say yes. Me, I'm like 100 years old now. I would say no, start from the beginning, but that's just me. This is still, I think, a great game, so I'm gonna recommend it pretty much across the board, but there's so much more I wanna talk about that I can't cover here. Not even like super duper spoiler stuff, but again, the Capcom restrictions, like I said, I agreed to them just because we wanted to be able to say like, is it good? Is it bad? The game is good, but I'm probably gonna make a video like about like my favorite changes, my favorite things that stayed the same. I don't know, so I'm still cooking on some ideas, but there's a lot more to talk about this one, especially because people aren't playing it yet. But yeah, I had a great time. It's a roller coaster ride. It was a roller coaster ride back when it originally released, but with, again, the Resident Evil 2-ishness of it, that remake, makes it even more of a roller coaster ride because everything looks downright thrilling. The characters are cooler. Everything is a little bit more interesting, especially with, no, I can't say that. Sorry. That's probably really annoying. But again, I'll talk about this stuff in another video. Just want to throw out some additional thoughts on RE4. So that's where I'm at now. I can answer some questions, so let me know in the comments if you have them. If I can't answer them, I'll save it for another video once the game is out, once it's in people's hands, you know? But let me know what you think about the original. Let me know your experience with the series, and 4 in particular. Let's talk about this stuff, guys. Because I can only talk about so many things, I actually have to keep this video pretty short, so I'm gonna go. But thank you guys listening to me ramble. Keep your eyes peeled for more Resident Evil videos, but I'm Jake Baldino. Subscribe because video games, pizza's on me.